Hello and welcome back. So, for those of you who are in the middle of the Irish content that's coming out on my YouTube channel, we're having a little bit of a break. So you're about 4 episodes in. Congratulations! If you're staying through the whole series, thank you so much. I hope you're enjoying it. But we figured we sneak this in here. So this is a podcast recently started by myself and my friend Kubi May. And we are just talking about all things paganism, really. Kubi follows in line more with the Celtic side of things, living in Glastonbury, and then I fall more in line with the Norse side of things just because of my history in Norse paganism. So if you're joining us for the first time, we do this about once a month. We have a few episodes behind us on YouTube and on Spotify. So we hope you check them out and hope you join us for future ones. But Kubi, for any new people, do you want to introduce yourself again for anyone who might not know who you are?
Oh, hi. Yeah,
As she's like messing
I'm
with her hair, like, hi.
hello, folks. So I'm QB, and I do a lot of Celtic workshops in Glastonbury, UK, but a lot of sort of online stuff around Druidry and the Trioworm and that kind of lineage of wisdom as well. So yeah, that's my jam. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we're so used to saying like upcoming stuff, but a lot of our stuff is kind of going or has been gone already because we've been doing this since
Yeah.
about March.
Yeah, it's actually a nice quiet period for a couple of months, which is so needed. So needed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so for everyone, our basic layout of these episodes so far has been kind of talking about the month in paganism, what's going on. So we've had a lot to talk about because we started in spring and then we went to basically the Beltane time and then we went to midsummer time. But now we're in July, and July is kind of a weird dead period in general when it comes to like pagan celebrations.
Mm.
But we did just have the solstice.
Mm.
So I figured that's something we could talk about as well as the solstice and what we did. And so, Kubi, what
Yeah.
did you do for the solstice?
So we had a beautiful sunset actually. We had really good weather for it. The White Springs did a wonderful ceremony, as did Chalice Well. Um, and then as the sun set, people gathered up on the tour for that. And a lot of people did all-nighters, and there was a lot of drumming and fire and mead. And then there was a ceremony for sunrise, and that was, I mean, I think we were briefly touching on it just before we started the podcast today. It was beautiful in all the ways it can be, but it's always slightly jarring when you get a lot of, it's more of an excuse for a lot of people to bring boom boxes and play drum and bass rather than treating the tour as like the sacred temple really that it's designed to be. So it's an interesting time because you see this kind of slight conflict of the worlds, the kind of very, very humanness of it all, and then also the old pagan traditions trying to do their thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so did you stay up all night for it? Like,
I did
oh wow.
actually. I was powered on coffee and honey mead. Yeah.
And boombox music.
And boombox music, yeah. Not that I wanted it there, but I suppose it does help keep you awake to some extent.
Is it just as windy at night as it is during the day on the tour?
Oh, it depends. Like some nights you get they're really still up there. And it wasn't too bad actually. It was quite a mild evening up there, luckily.
Hmm.
So that was nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every time I've gone up to the tour, like when I was staying in Glastonbury, I had to determine in myself that I was going to spend all night up on the tour at some point. But
Yeah.
every time I would think about it, I would go up to the tour and I would start sitting there, and it's just like just getting battered by wind on all sides. I'm like, I'm good. I'm gonna go back to
Yeah, yeah.
bed.
Not tonight. Yeah. What did you do for solstice? How was yours?
Yeah, so full disclosure, we already talked about this before, but we're sharing with you again because we were like, oh, this would be good to
I
talk about
was gonna
anyways. Yeah,
I was
so
gonna
if we,
blag that in a completely authentic way.
yeah, yeah, so if we seem like wow, that's really interesting, Jacob, wow, it's because we've already heard the story. um, so yeah, obviously I'm back in the United States. For people tuning in for the first time, we've had 2 lovely episodes where we got to film together where I was in Glastonbury at the time, and that was such a lovely time. Hopefully we'll have more of those in the future. But now I'm back in United States of America. And here in the United States of America, we have very few ancient sites because, we kind of killed everyone when we came over here and we destroyed all their ancient burial mounds. However, there are a few ancient burial mounds left. And one of them sites is the Serpent Mounds. And the Serpent Mounds is in Ohio. Ohio is not a place you'd think would be a very spiritual location at all, especially as someone who was raised in Ohio. It's very flat. There's lots of corn, and it's very industrious.
Corn.
There's
Speciality is corn. Oh dear,
some
Ohio.
in the Norse community we like to call it Kornheim, like Manaheim. There's Kornheim, means a place in the land of the corn. Yes, for the people in Europe who do not understand the full length of Kornheim, you can start driving at the start of the cornfields of Ohio, and then drive for about 18 hours before you run out of corn. It's just
Oh my
18
God.
hours. So basically any like 180-degree direction in front of you as you're driving is just corn and
Oh
soybeans
my
sometimes.
God.
It's horrifying. It's like I mean, there's the movie The Children of the Corn for a reason.
Yeah. God, that
Yeah.
does sound quite terrifying. It sounds like the start of a Halloween horror, actually. Like a
Why do you think we make so many
Texas
horror
Chain-
movies?
Yeah. I suppose it's great if you love corn, though. I mean, if you're a corn fanatic, yeah, it's the place to be.
Yeah. Now, the sad reality of the corn, it's fun to make fun of, but in places like Ohio, a lot of Ohio was forest. And so it's a very common story, much like in the UK and a lot of the world, is a lot of places that used to be woodland is now farmland, because flat river basin land is great for growing things. It was great for trees to grow in. It was great for the native people of America to live in. And the people around this area were, agricultural as well. So they had their own farms, but obviously not to the extent we have them now. And so it's funny because when we think about the beauty of a place, we think about mountains, we think about these big snow-capped peaks and things like that. And especially when it comes to America, I think of the Appalachian Mountains, I think of Rocky Mountains. But the places that people live and the places that most large civilizations grow are in the flat, boring areas of the world because we need to grow things. We need access to water, and mountains are very harsh living conditions. And so it was the same for the native people of America, as many of them lived in the areas like Ohio. There was, so many. I mean, the largest civilization in known North America was in Cahokia, which is in the middle of the flat plains of America. Now there is like natural prairie land, and prairies are very diverse locations, despite them being very low in trees. But yeah, Ohio, for instance, yeah, that's why we have serpent mounds in Ohio. Is basically what I was trying to get to. Is it's kind of in this area, much like Glastonbury, where you have like the Tor and you have a hill. And that's something that, people all around the world, they see hills as sacred. And it's probably because when you go up there, you have such a different, unique look at the world. If you're down in the fields, it's very different than if you're up on the hill. You feel like you're up with the gods. And I think that's something
Yeah.
that's very universal. And so Serpent Mound itself is built on top of a hill that overlooks a valley. And then all around this area is burial sites. And that's, again, a common theme. We see a sacred site with burial mounds around it. This is something I've seen in Cahokia, something I've seen in Uppsala. It's something we see in New Grange, is you have these sacred sites where people are also buried. And this is, yeah, it's really beautiful. And then Serpent Mound itself it's hard to describe over voice, but it's basically an earthen structure that's a coiled up snake that has really beautiful ripple patterns. And then it eventually leads to a big snake head that looks like it's almost swallowing an egg.
What?
Yeah,
That's great.
it's really cool. And then basically, I forget the exact alignment, but the
Mm,
whole snake is aligned to all the equinoxes and the solstices. Um,
yeah.
and it's really cool, and it's very preserved. Like, there is a society that preserves this. And so they were having an event for the solstice, and I was like, oh, this is going to be really cool. Getting to come back to America. I've only been back like 2.5 weeks, getting to do this. And they
Mm,
had like a full itinerary too. They had like every hour, like an event, and you're like, oh, cool. Like, yeah, this is going to be something really legit. And this is where everything fell apart. Is, I get there, I had a friend there, and they had a talk. It was like a Shawnee, like, a traditional Native American speaker. And it's like, oh, yes, this is going to be so cool. And we get there, and it's like a normal dude. And he's just like, hello, I'm here to talk about the building that we just built in a different park. I really like PowerPoint. I don't have
was
PowerPoint.
he like from the council? He's like, I've come
No,
to
he
represent the
he
council.
had nothing to do with the Shawnee. Literally not a member of the tribe. Nothing. He was just some dude they pulled from the
Oh
office.
no! Shit. How
Yeah.
disappointing.
Yeah, and there was a woman in front of me, and she had her phone on super magnify because she's old, and so I could read everything she was typing. And I watched her type out, "This is the most like pitiful display I've ever seen." to like a
Oh
friend.
gosh.
But you know,
Yeah.
we were waiting for it to get like a little bit more interesting, but it never got past that. You know, they did have a falcon display there as well, and then like two or three food trucks and a couple vendors. But that was kind of it, and then that was all there was until the sunset. And then it basically was like, there's the
Oh,
sunset, and they kick you out at 9:30.
oh God. Yeah, that
Yeah,
sounds really drab.
yeah,
For
and
such a
like,
beautiful sacred site as well. It sounds quite,
yeah,
yeah, drab state of
and
affairs.
so I kind of had this moment. You know, it's like this is our equivalent of Stonehenge, and Stonehenge right now has like 20,000 people or whatever at it, and they're all like, you know, and it might be a little catchy. I've never been there, but at least they have people who are druids. At least they have people who are spiritual, and they're doing something.
Yeah, yeah.
They also have assholes who spray it with cornstarch or potato starch or whatever they did.
I'm glad you saw that.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
glad you saw that. That wasn't that the craziest thing? Like, so what a statement to make. Why? Yeah, I can never get my head around, these protesters doing it on sites that are sacred, and it's not like a road or a bank. It's like
I
Neolithic.
really hate oil, so I'm
So
gonna go help destroy something that's really old.
yeah, like it actually doesn't help what they're doing. It's quite a turn off for a lot of people when they see
Yeah.
that. You know,
Now,
yeah,
again, like, you know, not to dive down that rabbit hole, but as far as like activism in general, a lot of people get into activism for the attention, and they will never admit it, and they'll never be like, I do this for attention. But people
yeah,
who go do stuff like that at Stonehenge, they're in it for the attention, whether they want to admit it or not.
absolutely.
If you
Yeah.
actually want to be a real activist, learn from the French, the best revolutionaries in the world. Take some manure, go to your state buildings, and spread manure on those buildings. That's how the French get stuff done. They threaten to behead you, and they spread shit everywhere.
Oh my God.
I
Well,
want to see. I want to see more of that.
it's an interesting thing actually, because I used to be very into activism when I was younger. Like when I was living in London, I was really, in fact, I actually ran an activist art group called the People's Tribe for a while. But I got to a point where I was like, it's actually, it can be quite disempowering when you're constantly rallying at the gates of something, asking them to change.
Mm,
And you're much better off. It's much more empowering sometimes to take your power as a community and work with what's around you.
mm,
You're like, what can you actually change within your own power without
yeah.
requiring permission from somebody else?
Mm,
And
yeah.
so yeah, my activism faded out into that as I got older. But now when I see them spraying this stuff, I'm just like, oh God, this is exactly the sort of thing I would have done actually in my 20s. So I
Yeah.
kind of have a little bit of compassion for it. But you're right, it's like, where is that desire to rebel so much coming from? Is it an undealt with mother father wound? Are you
100
rebelling just
usually.
for the sake of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's more effective ways to rebel. There really are. These things are important, but
Literally
spraying
every
Stonehenge.
single generation of humanity has had the rebellious youth,
Yeah,
to some degree.
and it's needed to some extent, right, to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
the world to change. But oh my gosh, when you've got to the point where you're spraying Stonehenge to make a statement,
yeah.
that's yeah, it's just not it's
Well,
not effective.
so this is a great example. Actually, this is a perfect lead-in. So, you know, I could sit
Yeah,
here and be upset. I can be that woman with my phone and texting my friends. This is a pitiful display. I hate everything about this. Woo, 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 woo," about stone or serpent mounds.
yeah,
Or you could be that person that's like, oh, I don't like how serpent mounds is being profited, and you go spray paint their building or you go desecrate the monument, because that's essentially what
yeah,
these people do. It's, you know, if like
yeah,
I looked at the situation, I'm like, oh, I'm upset at serpent mounds, so I'm going to desecrate it. Like,
yeah,
whoa,
yeah.
this is not the correct answer. Like, you know, there's the positive answer. But the thing with the positive answer, it's harder. It's harder to be the
Yeah.
positive change in the world. It's much easier just to
Hmm.
be angry and upset and send that mean text, or be angry. Um,
So true.
in the instance at Serpent Mounds, my reaction is because they also didn't have any ceremony planned, absolutely none. And I was like, well, shoot, I got my drum, I got my rattle. Why don't I just do the ceremony? And like, you know, 100%, if there was like, you know, someone there that planned the ceremony, there was like a Shawnee representative there, like 100%, like I would have been like, yes, like let them lead the ceremony. But the fact that there was
Yeah.
hundreds of people here, like it wasn't like there was 5 or 6, there was hundreds of people watching the solstice, and no one was doing anything. And I talked to a few people, like I saw people bring like fire fans. I'm like, whoa, are you gonna light those up? And they're like, no, probably not. It's like, oh, like let's light the fire flames. You know, I was talking to a few people there for spiritual reasons, but there was nothing to bring them together. And so
Yeah.
I got my drum, I got my rattle, a few of my friends, and we performed the ceremony for Serpent Mound. And
That's so
it
cool.
was small, and we only had a few participants. We had a couple people join us from like the people we had talked to, but people
Mm.
watched us and respected us. It wasn't anything grand. It was just basically a calling of the directions, a thanking of the natural powers, and bowing at each direction and thanking them for everything, and and looking towards the sun and having like a deep bow, and then spreading tobacco around as well, since tobacco is a traditional offering in America.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the main thing I want to leave people with here is, again, the positive change. Like, I'm upset. Oh, I am upset that there's nothing done at Serpent Mounds. I can be
Mm.
upset and angry, or I can be a positive change and be like, no, I'm going to do the ceremony then. But there's also a good and a right way to do that. I was walking around. I didn't want to be disrespectful because I recognize not everyone would be into the drums and the rattles and the music and all that stuff. And I didn't like, I wanted to do it. Like, there's a bunch of really nice locations in the mounds itself. And I was like, ooh, it'd be so good to do it in there. Like, but I wanted to be respectful. And so I actually found someone that worked there, and I said, hey, I just want to let you know, I really want to play some music, to have a little ceremony. Are you okay with that? And they were like, yeah, no, thank you so much for asking. It was like, where would you prefer we do it? And they obviously didn't say like, oh, get in the coil, boy. Like, that would have been cool if they're like, yeah, get on top of that mound. Like, I would have been into it. But they, they told me like an area close by. They're just like, go do it over there. And they really
Yeah,
were
yeah.
like appreciative. And so,
Yeah, that's a
uh,
perfect metaphor of what we're talking about, isn't it? It's
yeah,
like, what can you do within your own power to create that positive change, to bring meaning back to life and ritual back to life?
yeah.
Yeah, good for you, man. That's pretty cool.
And another good example too is like we were talking to someone beforehand, or my friend was, and they were saying the reason nothing is done there is because of bureaucracy. Because there's a board of directors that runs Serpent Mounds, and the board of directors wants nothing to do with spirituality, and
Wow.
they will never let something go through the board. And so if I went the bureaucratic route and was like, "Hello, Mr. Board, I'll wear my suit and ask permission to do it," like they would never do it, let me do it.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
what if I just ask the groundskeeper who doesn't give a fuck, and I just do it?
yeah. Exactly.
So just do it.
Exactly. Careful, clever sidestepping. Yeah, I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it does take a little bit of gusto. It takes a little bit of guts, and maybe a little bit of mischievousness to enact change in the world. But next year I'm going to go. Now that I know I can do it, next year I'm going to show up with 50 people, and we're going to do a bigger celebration. And then the next year we're going to have a bigger one and a bigger one, until before you know it, maybe we have the entire mound already doing it, and we never ask permission. That's the thing. Sometimes it's better
Yeah,
to ask for
right.
forgiveness than permission.
Ah, like that. That's very cool. Oh, little Zoggeroo's here. Oh, I'm getting fidgety.
The Chihuahuas are always with us for our new listeners.
Oh yeah, this is like an attached. It's like an extra limb, isn't he, little Zorro?
Never far.
Never too far. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah, that was an interesting. So both of us doing a solstice thing, and of course July is super quiet. Barely anything on the there's nothing on the Celtic wheel or the pagan wheel at this time of year.
yeah, I'm trying to think what is the next pagan thing. I mean, there's Lunasa, but that's not until August, right?
Yeah, that's it. That is
Or
the next
Lunasa.
one.
Lunasa, not Lunasa.
Oh,
As I
sorry.
look.
There's Lammas, which is
Lammas.
the
When is that one?
second August or the first.
Okay, but
Second,
not
first.
July still.
One of the harvesty ones. Yeah.
Is Lammas is it actually historic, or is it Mabon that's new? Because I know it's
I,
Mabon or
as far as
Mabon
I
or
know,
Lammas.
it's quite a historic one. Yeah, because it would have been connected more with harvest and the fields and things like that.
Yeah. Well, in general, I'd be curious to see how historic it is, because I know that for the most part, Samhain and Beltane were like the main anchors of
Yeah, yeah.
holidays in the ancient Celtic world, and very true again of the Norse world as well. Is really just had Yule and Midsummer, and then of course there would have been
Mm,
small cultural and other holidays in between, but the two anchors of holidays were the extreme points in the dark and the light.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I suppose July, it's an interesting thing to reflect on, isn't it? About what would have been going on for our ancestors in July. Like, would it been a time of rest, with the sun being so hot in places,
Sweating in the
just
fields.
sweating in the
I
fields,
think, yeah, I
just
think so.
finding shelter and yeah, maybe traveling a little, and maybe not traveling. I don't know. It's hard to imagine, but yeah, there's not too much to talk about. with that this month. Not too much going on.
I would imagine, I mean, in the northern world, like, yeah, sure, it gets hot. Like, I just saw the news. It was like, there's a heat wave coming in London. It's going to be 26 degrees,
I
which is
know.
78 degrees Fahrenheit for you Americans out there who have been living through 37 to 39 degrees for the last 4 weeks.
Oh, it's so honestly, British people are just we're wimps. I hold my hands up. I will represent my people and just say it. We're the same when it gets cold. When there's like you get these little announcements on the train station where it's like, oh, there is a frosty leaf on the track. We're going to have to hold all transport for today. And people in Canada are like, what? You have a little drizzle of snow and the world stops in
Yeah, my
Britain?
eyelashes are
The
frozen
worst.
together.
Honestly, we've got no willpower over
Yeah,
here.
so in all
Too hot.
honesty,
35.
yeah, I mean, summer, like, I'm trying to think, for the most part of what we know of, like, the Celtic period and everything, was actually a fairly cold time, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think yeah, it was fairly cold. And so the summers probably wouldn't have been that brutal. So I just imagine you would have been working a lot, like working in the fields, tending to the animals, and
Yeah.
trying to get as much work as you can done outside. I figure this has also been the perfect time to start building things. And so if there was ever anything in the community
Mm.
that needed to be built, this was the time to do
Yeah.
it. And it's not like I really don't think in the past they would have had these multi-year long building things as far as like the wooden structures. They probably would have tried to get them
Mm.
done in the summer. Like, oh, we need to
Yeah.
fix the barn, build this, build that. This would have been the time to do it.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Like it would have been a time where they weren't battling against the elements, I suppose, either
Yeah.
in one way or the other. And I suppose it might have been a time of travel. And perhaps that's where we get the idea of the summer holiday from. This feeling, maybe it's an ancestral feeling in us that
Mm.
needs to take off and go to the next village or visit the next town
Yeah.
far away
Or
at this
selling
time of
things. Like if you were a
yeah,
merchant or sold anything, this is maybe a lot of the summer markets. Like we see that a lot. Like a lot of the markets are also in the summer,
yeah,
still today. Like craft fairs, music festivals, and stuff like that. So there may have been a lot of those elements as well. In general,
yeah,
people are busy. Like even now, people are busy during the summer. Like I see less
yeah,
viewership on YouTube because less people are in the house watching YouTube. They're outside
yeah.
doing stuff.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And there's more serotonin in everyone's bodies, of course, which, happier, more energy, more lively. So that would have always been the same.
Yeah. Well, I mean, shoot, the sun's setting what, like 10, 11-ish there? Something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
Like I
It's
know
really
my
beautiful.
friend in the Midlands, well, she'd probably hit me if she's in the north. Um, she says that the sun, it only is dark for like 3 or 4 hours. And it's like, that is kind of crazy. And she's like, I'm going a little mad. And she, whinges about it a lot. I'm like, I think you like the madness though. And I think there is this kind of like summer madness that sets in because you have so much
Yeah.
sun, you get so little sleep, but you're also chock full of sun energy.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it balances out. Exactly. Oh, so yeah, we don't really have an awful lot to discuss around the pagan wheel and the pagan calendar at the moment for
Yeah.
this month. But we were thinking, weren't we, about maybe just having a good old discussion about the core of it all, which is magic.
Magic. Yes.
Magic.
Yeah, no, I kind of posed this as a possible discussion for us today,
Yeah.
because I've been doing my work on the Celtic videos, my Irish videos, and then my next video is going to be on Wales. And so I've been reflecting a lot on what magic means, like what is magic? And
Mhm.
so I guess that could be well, the first question is magic real? Do you believe in magic?
I do.
Do you believe?
I do.
I would say I
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
But then becomes a question of what is magic? If you believe in it, what is it?
yeah. And actually, that even more fascinating thing of what is placebo and what is
Mm,
genuine supernatural behavior playing
yeah.
out. I mean, for me, both of those things are actually very mystical. And when you get sort of sciencey people or atheists saying, "Oh, well, it's probably just placebo effect when that person heals themselves with, their own mind or their own thoughts." I have to take a step back and be like, that is one of the most magical things about being human beings. Surely that
Mm,
we can actually heal ourselves or change our reality
yeah.
through placebo. That is the definition of magic, I would have thought, if we're
Mm,
looking at that. So yeah, it's interesting that placebo gets pigeonholed as a scientific explanation for phenomena, when actually I think it it really just describes magic.
Mm. Well, how much,
Yeah.
my experience in hospitals is not grand, but I've watched a lot of doctor
Mm.
shows, and one of the big things that they always mention in the doctor shows, which I know is also true, is just how
Yeah.
much mentality shifts someone's ability to heal. Is if
Yep.
someone has a positive outlook on things, they are more likely to live longer and more likely to fight through diseases. Whereas if you have a negative outlook on disease or cancer or life, you typically will not live as long, especially if you're battling
Yeah.
something chronic. Is if, the more you give into it, the less likely you are to live longer.
Yeah, exactly. There's something about willpower, being able to overcome matter with the mind, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things with magic is it gives you, or magic techniques or healing techniques, whatever you want to
Mm.
use. It gives you that extra willpower. It gives you that extra understanding of how to get through something.
Yeah, absolutely. And the heightened power, I mean, if you look back at any shamanic culture or any indigenous cultures where there was somebody that would do rituals with the community, it becomes quite evident that they were actually kind of masters, the first masters of psychology, because for that mind over matter process to take place and for placebo to actually take its hold on somebody, it needs to be truly believable.
Mm.
And those things get enhanced with ritual. So if somebody's wearing a magical cloak, you're more likely to believe in the healing process. If somebody's banging a drum at you, you're more likely to believe in the healing process. And if
Yeah,
you're more likely to believe in that healing process, it's more likely to work. So the whole theatre of ritual really is to invoke the placebo effect. And I
yeah,
reckon our ancestors knew that in a way that wouldn't have been described scientifically. They just understood when these sort of elements are in place,
yeah.
real healing occurs.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that it's already coming up and already, it's already working in my mind is, what's the difference between
Mm.
magic, ritual, ceremony, all this, and it's also interwoven.
Yeah.
And I think, maybe the thing we need to talk about first is like Harry Potter and the fantasy
Yeah.
perception of what magic is.
Mm.
It's not necessarily like casting a fireball, Expelliarmus,
Yeah.
it's not that. And I think
Yeah.
because of this Harry Potter, this wizard worldview, people, when you say magic, that's their immediate first response is, oh, you're a witch. Oh, you're trying to cast Expelliarmus and think you're going to fly on a broom and all this stuff. And it's like,
Think
no,
you're
it's much
Harry
more.
Potter, do ya? Yeah, I love that. Oh, wait, you think you're Harry Potter, do ya? It's quite funny.
Yeah.
Just
Oh,
make you
you're a
wonder if
druid. How do you become
those
one of them, in?
yeah, it's like I do wonder if films like that have been put out almost to dumb down the idea of what magic really is, almost to ridicule it on some level, or to baby it, or to create a caricature of it,
Mm,
when it's actually a very deeply sacred and ancient thing.
yeah. Well, I think that's true of anything. Anytime something
Yeah.
becomes characterized, or stereo, what you just said. I get it. What word you just used? Caricatures? Or no?
Caricatures of themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, sort of like
Um,
a
yeah, everything gets that way, and our perceptions of reality are shifted by that. Just like people's perception of countries, the
yeah.
stereotypes of countries. Everyone thinks they go to Germany and everyone's going to be wearing lederhosen and eating schnitzel all the time. That's only true in Bavaria. It's not true in Berlin. um,
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
Now, but like,
Yeah,
stereotypes usually exist for a reason. Again, like, I can sit here and talk like this in American because there are people that talk like that. We don't all talk like that,
yeah,
but man, there's a lot of people who talk like this.
yeah,
And there's a lot of people with big trucks and cowboy hats. Like, those exist too. But does that mean
exactly.
that Fireball exists? I don't know.
Exactly. And maybe these things are quite good. The kind of like the Harry Potter shows and Lord of the Rings in particular, actually, was I think that was probably one of the things that really influenced me as a child and led me into magic.
Mm,
But as a child, you're already very much in the realm of magic. So you already have a relationship with it. And what I've realized recently is that children spend the first 7 years of their lives in theta brainwave, which is
mm,
the brainwave that adults are only in when they're creating or about to fall asleep or in trance.
mm.
So you imagine children actually have access to that trance-like state in that magical realm that we call the other world.
Yeah.
And then it gradually, the brainwaves slowly change into, I think it's alpha and beta and all the rest of them,
The boring
as you become
ones.
an adult. The boring ones, the ones that make you go to work and have routine.
Ew.
So when we're talking about magic and what is magic, I think the first people we can look to are children and how they view the world and what experience they're actually having. Because they're seeing things that we can't see because
Yeah.
they're in theta brainwaves, which is amazing.
Well, I tell you, it's funny you mentioned Lord of the Rings because I actually had never read Lord of the Rings before. I watched the movies a
Yeah.
billion times. And the books were always, when I was younger, it was like, ooh, that's too boring. Like, I want the swords and sorcery. And that's what the movie kind of leads more into is like, there are some
Yeah.
fireballs every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas in the books, if you, one of the biggest things that came into reading the books is, if you read them more like a mythology rather than a
Mm.
fantasy, you get the true essence of what Tolkien was trying to do. Because when you read what
Yeah.
the conversations between the wizards, between Gandalf and Saruman, they're just like the mythological stories of the Finnish people or the Celts. Is they're not talking about throwing fireballs at each other. They're like, beware of his voice, for his voice is powerful.
Yes.
And when
Yeah.
I'm reading the
Absolutely.
Mabinogion right now, and that's one of the things they're talking about is the power of the voice and the power of song. That's magic.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And how the mind can be programmed as well with sound and tone and music and all these things.
Yeah.
We're so easily influenced, really, the mind with things like that.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
again, it's like you
yeah.
said with the brain waves, is when we're doing shamanic drumming right now, when you're playing certain frequencies in music, you're
Mm.
altering your brain waves, your brain chemistry to enter trance-like states.
Yeah,
That's magic.
totally is magic right there. Boom.
But then you get into
In
like the
fact,
darkness. Oh, go ahead, finish your thought.
I was going to say years ago when I was studying training to be a therapist, I did my dissertation on using ritual in combination with art therapy to heal people with addiction,
Hmm.
and had like a case study and compared the difference between people that went, say, to sort of AA, where they've got community and support and a system like the 12 steps. And then if you took that system and added other qualities to it, like ritual, a leader with a cloak, song, prayer, mantras, candlelight, stuff like that. And they're way, way more likely to break away from addiction and heal with ritual aspect. So that was fascinating.
Yeah.
And it just shows the power of that. It really does.
So an interesting thought with that is something I was reflecting on earlier as well. Is
Mhm.
what is the main difference between Catholicism and Protestantism?
Oh, this is a divergence. What is ritual, of course.
Ritual. Yeah.
It is literally
Uh,
that, isn't it?
yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's other things as well.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
there's other
The
bits.
songs are quite different,
Very-
but ritual is the main one.
Yeah.
Is if you go to a Protestant service or it started, obviously there's the lack of saints. Like there's this very distinct lack of saints. Which again, like if you see
Mm.
Catholicism as the next step after paganism, it's like okay, we have Christianity, paganism fused. That's Catholicism. You had various saints that were worshipped, and you had rituals that were performed, much like the
Yeah.
pagans would have had multiple deities and aspects of life and rituals they performed.
Right.
Whereas Protestantism is the more purified form of that. Oh no, we get rid of the pagan elements. There is no more ritual. There is no more multiple gods. There is the one God, and that's the main thing with
Yeah.
Protestantism. And that's in recent arguments I've had with my mother. That's one of the things I tell her. I was like, the biggest like detriment of Protestantism is the lack of ritual, because ritual
Yeah.
is so important to our personal health, our ability to heal, and our ability to connect. And when you don't
Yes.
have ritual, there is only like one way, like prayer. It's like the only way to connect. It's like prayer is just one way to connect to the divine.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look even at oh gosh, what's it called when they eat the bread and drink the wine?
Communion.
Communion. Yeah, I mean that is a very pagan ritual. That literally drinking the blood of Christ to take on board his
And eating him.
spiritual properties, and then to eat him. I mean, where do people think this came from? It's totally pagan in its nature. But what's interesting about it is the idea of literally digesting intention as well. That's
Hmm.
another ritual that's going to be very effective in terms of magic, because when we eat things, our brain goes, okay, I can actually digest that, and we understand digestion. So you can almost trick the body and the mind into digesting intention along with literally digesting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, this is
Yeah.
maybe another divergent a little bit, but something again reflecting on because some of the like Baptist, I was raised in
Mhm.
Baptist churches for the most part, which are very Protestant, very American,
Yeah.
and occasionally we would do communion. It wasn't very often; it was maybe once a year, twice a year, maybe on Easter. But one of the things that in adult reflection, it's like communion at one point was probably something that was like more sacred in the sense of like the amount, like the way the bread was made.
Yeah.
It probably was like bread that was made on the cathedral grounds. Like one of the things in Glastonbury Abbey is there is like the old like kitchen. It is beautiful kitchen. That's probably where they were making the bread for communion. They were probably making the wine for communion there. And now it's like here's a box grape juice and some like crackers.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
And
Straight from Tesco's,
it's like
like.
no, to me, part of the ritual, like people do it because they're told to do it. Like, oh, you have to do communion, so they go
Mm,
up and they eat the bland stale cracker and drink the crappy grape juice. But in the past, there would have been actual like ritual around it, and more like, this is the bread of the
mm,
community from our fields. This is the wine made for months by our people in our hands. Drink the blood of
yeah,
Christ, and it's like, oh, you get so much more out of it when you're connected to the
yeah.
elements of it than just some bland stale crackers.
Absolutely. And also even thinking about the word spirit and
Mm.
how people would, infuse herbs and things in the spirit, like in vodkas, meads, any alcohol that will preserve. And we call it these things spirits today. And if you trace that back, it's probably because, our ancestors were so aware that they could trap spirit in those things and then ingest them. So when you tie that into communion as well, it's like, what was it about literally drinking wine? You're
Yeah.
taking in the spirit of something as well.
Well, especially with you, you're really big into making tinctures.
Yeah. Oh, I've had a lovely time doing that this month. It's always the solstice where I go out on the land and update my tinctures. So I did one of each of the Ogham trees this
Ooh.
year. That was
So,
really
what has been
lovely.
your connection with tinctures as far as a form of magic?
Okay, so for me, it's a way of getting to know the land very intimately. So when we talk about plant medicines and people have these massive trips with them and taking huge amounts and purging from them and going through a whole thing, what I ultimately found during lockdown actually was that there's a whole more subtle realm of working with plants in a shamanic way. So when I work with, for instance, the classic one example here is the oak, right? So you create an oak, you just put that in some spirit, you leave it for 6 weeks, you have your oak tincture, and then just a few drops of that. If I meditate with the oak tincture, I become very aware that I start taking on the thoughts and the attitudes of the oak wisdom,
Mm.
which is very grounded and paternal and boundaried. And so if I'm looking for wisdom in a certain field, I would choose a certain tree or a certain flower to learn from, to
Yeah.
communicate with. And for me, that is totally magic because you're ingesting the spirit of a plant in the same way that you do with plant medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think there's a lot of, communion in that as well, because you're
Totally
communing
is.
with the spirit.
Totally that. It's exactly that.
Holy shit, is that
Yeah.
why it's called communion?
This is it.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. All these little links back to magic, and the church have so many clues because of that crossover and syncretization that happened with the pagans. So if we want to look to find our old rituals and magic, it is hidden actually within church rituals, which is an ironic
Now,
thing. But
speaking of hidden, let's return to Lord of the Rings.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because this again, like if you actually sit down and read Lord of the Rings like mythology, one of the things that's
yeah,
really apparent is how much things are just forgotten. And it's not like, oh, like
yeah.
the Ents. It's like, oh, we lost the wives. Like people forgot the Ents were a thing. They faded into memory. And it's like long ago,
Mm,
it was just known that you could go and talk to these trees using a specific
yeah,
language. It's like the
yeah,
trees could be communicated in Elvish, but then the elves disappeared and the language of the elves disappeared, which means the trees were no longer communicated with. And then they turned and solidified because things were no longer interacting with them. And it's just like,
yeah,
this is a total allegory for our way of how we used to communicate with nature. We used to communicate
yeah.
with it on such a more intimate level. And then, not because of any one person's change or fault, we forgot over generations. We forgot the magic.
Totally. Totally. And I was talking to somebody up on the tour the other day about playing the lyre like it's like a small harp to trees and the joy that you feel back from the tree
Mm.
as an energy when you do that. And it's something we wouldn't even think to do. It looks like a completely mad activity to indulge yourself in. You know, if you went to a normal town outside of Glastonbury, started playing a harp to a tree, you'd be sectioned within moments, probably. But it's that relating, because you're connecting with sound and vibration, and actually that is another way. It's another language that connects humans and plants and trees and animals, without a direct language. And you can
Yeah.
feel it. It's in the heart, and it's so loud once you know how to do it.
Mm.
Or when you quieten the mind enough to feel it, you can feel that there's so much magic on the land, so much magic from trees,
Yeah.
and you can feel their appreciation for that contact. Like
So
it can't just be that I don't believe is placebo. I feel it so strongly in my body.
let's work on a definition for magic. Would you say magic
Mm.
is the ability to commune with spirits?
I don't know. I think it's broader than that.
Okay.
Maybe it's broader than that. Maybe it's the ability to affect yourself and the world around you through communion with spirit and ritual.
So
There's
what I
something
just said
about
with more words.
changing. Yeah, fantasy of yeah, exactly. But I know what you mean. There's definitely communion with spirits is definitely a part of it. But then there's lots of things like the placebo effect and healing with the power of the mind that doesn't require communion with spirit.
Are you not just communing with your own spirit when you're healing yourself, though?
Ooh, I guess so. That's a good argument for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I do think there's something to
Oh,
like, you know, in all cultures, and this is definitely why I'm not into like insular paganism. I'm not into this
yeah. Mm.
concept of like, you know, you should only communicate with your tribe. Like, that's not what we are as a species. We learn from one another, and all of us hold a piece of the puzzle. All of us have figured out something to create the image of what life is. And I think like one of the big things like chakras make sense to me. Like some, you know, another culture
Yeah.
figured that out, and I'm not going to
Yeah.
deny myself that. And of course, there's been people that take the idea of chakras and transcribe that into the Celtic with the idea of the three wells. And then, of course, there's
Mm.
also the concept, the four-part soul within Norse mythos. You know, people have kind of
Yeah.
taken that and they're like, okay, there's the kind of this concept of the four parts of the soul and the chakras and combining them. And because we're all
Interesting.
trying to figure this out, and it's like, yeah, the more I've connected with plant medicines, the more I've done, you know, trance journeys, the more I realize there is a thing here I can communicate with. There's a thing here. There's a thing that,
Mm.
and so there are
Yeah.
kind of these points in my body that are separate that I can talk to, even though are part of
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really real thing, especially, I mean, I sort of know that quite well from doing Reiki healing as well. So that, you kind of work with the chakras for that. And you can really feel that they're each, there's certain emotions that are stored in different kind of centers around the body,
Mm,
which, we call the chakras. So it's fascinating, isn't it? Like
yeah.
how these things filter through.
Well, one of the big
Um,
questions I've been asking people a lot is like, where do they feel certain gods at? Like when you connect to a god, where do you feel it in yourself?
mm,
Or if you're feeling a blockage, like, okay, where do you feel that blockage? Like, you know, like
yeah.
I've talked to people and they're like, oh, I feel stress like here. Like this is where I store my stress. I'm like, that's very interesting. Why is it there? And then for me, you know, I'm sure I don't know if I've talked about on this podcast. I store my stress in the root chakra and the prostate. Like the
Yeah.
pelvic floor region is where I store my stress, and so that's something that
Yeah.
I've had to commune with. And every single point where you store your stress is a different way you have to commune with your own spirit.
Oh
And
my
it,
gosh, it's so true.
yeah,
Sorry, Jake, I just
no,
got
yeah,
so excited because
yeah,
I
please,
had a
yeah, hop in.
direct I had a direct experience of this just this week where I realized I was carrying too much weight from somebody else on my shoulders.
Mm,
And as I realized this mentally, my shoulders went, oh, and I woke up and it was like I'd done a somersault and fell down the stairs. I was
oh
like,
wow,
what have I done? I just woke up and my back was completely screwed up for a couple of days and it wouldn't budge. And ended up going to the spa, and that kind of helped a little bit,
mm.
admittedly. But essentially, what made it go is I put my hands on my shoulders and I just said, I give you permission to drop this weight now. And I woke up and it
Yeah,
was gone.
yeah.
So that connection with the mind and the body is again another form of magic, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I remember, you know, not to name the name specifically, but someone, you know, I met in Glastonbury.
Mhm.
But I ended up giving them like hape. We did a hape ceremony, and they told me that it helped with their back pain.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's not something it should do. But it's because, like,
Yeah.
one of the beauties of Pompeii is it really like closes the world, and like, all the bullshit flighting around, like you're just like isolated in a moment. And so
Yeah.
for that individual, perhaps because of the stress of their life, they were putting so much stress on their lower back that the moment something broke through that, they released, and that's all it
Yeah.
took to get it away. And it's like, okay, there's still science behind it, and I think that's kind of the beauty of magic. A lot of people say, oh, it's, so we have science now, we don't need magic. But the beauty of
Yeah.
magic now in our scientific world is we're finding more and more that these old scientific rituals, these old, these old techniques spiritually,
Mhm.
are connected to science.
Yeah. Like they actually marry up quite well. Like
Yeah.
one explains the other, which is a beautiful realization because there's always a feeling of a bit of a opposition there between the scientific community and the spiritual community. But truly, I think they're going to become most effective when they realize that they are kind of they're reliant on each other
Yeah.
and they work together really well.
Well, same thing with like therapy. Is the more I've learned
Mm.
about shamanism, is like shamans were just some of the earliest therapists. Like they had different techniques, but they were
Absolutely.
people. Sometimes people just needed to have a third party object to look at, like oracle or divination. They needed something to get them out of their own head. And sure, you can sit here and be like, "Ooh, the divining of the cards or the runes or all this," and it's like at the end of the day, it's psychology to get someone unfucked and get someone out of their own head.
I like that. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, there's a little ritual that I do at the end of all of my therapy sessions where I get someone to release something that they want to release from that session. So something that they've spoke through and they want to let go of, and we burn it in a little candle, and then I give them the ashes,
Hmm.
and they have to find a yew tree near where they live because yews represent death and rebirth, right?
Yeah.
And they have to bury the ashes themselves under the roots of the yew. And this is not because I've read this in an ancient text or because I had an old like Gandalf figure inform me of it,
I'm sure
but
you did.
I know the power of magic and the power of ritual, and I know if I give that to them, that empowers a person to then release that themselves. They're not fully relying on me as a therapist to
Yeah.
heal them or fix them. They actually end the session themselves by doing that last
Hmm.
activity by themselves.
No, that's really
So it's
beautiful.
such a, isn't it? It's such a
Yeah.
nice way to like help someone onto the path of empowerment. And it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
simple ritual, so simple.
Yeah, well, it's something I was thinking of. So, did I tell you the quest I was sent on
Mhm.
in Ireland by the medicine woman in Ecuador?
No. Or
I was
maybe.
sent. It was yeah. So I was sent on a quest, and and this is a good one to talk about like magic and what is the magic of this
Yeah.
quest I was sent on. Like in Ecuador, I was there to to do ayahuasca, and this I was talking and kind of opening up to this woman, and she looked at me and she's like, "You need to heal your feminine side, and so you need to go to Ireland." Just like straight up told me go to Ireland, and I was like, oh, okay. And then she was like, and then take quartz crystals and go to various sacred sites in Ireland and bury them there, and take a rock from there, put it into your water, and
Ooh,
drink it.
wow. Pretty
It's like,
specific
right,
instructions
yeah,
there.
yeah. And so, I throughout the journey, I did it. When I was going across Ireland, I took these stones to various places and I buried them. And then I kind of had that exchange. Here's a quartz crystal for this stone. And so now my water bottle, it's just in the other room, has stones from the Hill of Ishna or the Hill of Tara, the cave tied to the Morrigan, Oli Nikat. It has a rock from a beautiful waterfall there. It has and a few other various places I can't think of the top of my head. And then it also has rocks from Scotland in there. It has rocks from one of my favorite lakes, lochs in Scotland. It has a rock from the place where the only idol to any goddess was found in Scotland, in Balchulish. And now it has, I gave one of the quartz to a friend just as a gift. And intuitively, I don't even think I told her the reason for this. Intuitively, she took it with her to the Callanish stones on the Isle of Lewis at the solstice. And she sent me a picture. She's like, I buried the stone for you here.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
And so,
That is incredible.
then okay, so now I have this bottle of water doing all this, and I have one of the quartz, like the
Yeah.
last quartz in my medicine pouch, like in my bag. So what is the magic behind this?
Yeah. I guess it's because do you feel, I mean, you'll know this more than anyone. Do you feel it's like it's giving you extra meaning towards your healing journey?
Mm.
That extra little bit of a push towards it actually actualizing.
Yeah, for me, it's more about the quest, more
Yeah.
about the journey than the destination. If the destination is collecting these rocks, do I think I'm getting magical properties from this water, drinking it? Possibly, probably not. I'm probably just getting a little bit more like grit in it every now and then. But to me, it was about getting you to take a journey. and getting these quests from
Right.
someone, like you need to take the journey, and on that journey you're going to find the healing, and the
Yeah,
rocks are just going to be
exactly.
something there to remind you of it, of that journey you've been on. And and this
Mm,
and like one of the things is, it led me, like my Scottish event led me to being in a room full of women,
yeah,
and sharing. So all of these other things that I went through to get to deliver these stones and get these stones was all a healing journey. And so,
totally. So
are the
it's
rocks
not, that's
themselves
it.
healing? I don't know. But was the
So
journey
is it,
healing? Yes.
it almost like it initiates the hero's journey
Mhm.
process, which is one of the oldest psychological journeys that you can have for healing,
Yeah.
really. And it's in all folklore for that reason. It's, embedded in there. And then, of course, there's also the idea of symbolism being our oldest language. It's our native language. We were making signs, gestures, and, things like that before we had voice,
Yeah.
before we were actually had words. So it can access, with color and symbolism, it accesses a primordial, old part of ourselves, which, the root of healing can be so much more effective from that place. But that's why promotion works. That's why graphic design is a thing, because they
Mhm.
know certain colors and certain symbols will activate certain responses in us.
Right.
It taps into something way archaic than we're used to sort of consciously thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of going off that with the journey of healing I went through, is one of the things I learned is I needed to heal my heart, and that led me to
Yeah,
Glastonbury as well, which is known as the heart chakra of the world. And it also,
absolutely.
and then I started thinking about it, and again looking into chakras, and it's like the color of the heart chakra is green, and I ended up in the green place in the world, which is Ireland. So it's like, okay, like there's more of these elements getting tossed into this idea of this healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible, really, isn't it? It makes you realize how intellectual the world is, like as a living, as a we're on a living being, and we are living beings, and it's probably governed by even greater living beings.
Yeah.
For us all to have this experience where magic, whether it's through science, placebo, symbolism, all of these things are magic, can play out in this big theater of life. It's incredible.
Yeah. Well, one of the things if I encounter an atheist and we get talking about spirituality and stuff, because typically I find people who are hardcore atheists are typically that way because they're hard believers in science. They're like, I believe in science and what
Yeah,
I can perceive or what I can test or quantify. I'm like, well, can you
yeah,
quantify gravity? What is gravity? It's an invisible force that acts upon us every single day by the earth, by the sun, by the moon. And so you have these three gigantic
yeah,
bodies. Like, is a tree alive? Yes. Okay, we can quantify a tree is alive. Well, is the earth alive?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, I can talk to a
Yeah,
tree and feel a vibration from a tree. What about the literal giant rock we are floating on in freaking space,
yeah,
like
yeah.
wrapped around the gigantic ball of fire? Like, yeah, okay, science is cool, but like that's still magic to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you look at the connection with the solar flares and how that affects people emotionally.
Yeah.
We totally have this symbiotic kind of relationship with everything in the cosmos. And that's why astrology is a thing as well. Of course, our old sages and masters knew that. They understood that the movement of the planets did affect us on some level.
It's so funny because one of the things I mentioned when I randomly talk about Glastonbury to people, I'll be like, Glastonbury is a place that I learned that astrology is much deeper than just knowing what month you were born in.
Oh yeah. Every
Because
day on the high street, people are like, God, that Mercury in retrograde, did you guys survive that at your house?
well,
Like a normal bus stop conversation here.
yeah, because like here you can survive. Someone's like, oh, what's the star sign? You're like, oh, I'm a Cancer, but you can't survive on that in Glastonbury. In Glastonbury, someone's like, oh, you're a Cancer, but what's your Venus rising?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
Exactly.
like, my what?
Yeah, exactly. You need your whole chart printed out here. That's
Yeah.
when you know your stuff.
Now, to challenge that, do you think there is a limit to how in depth it can go? Like, is there a point it does become BS?
Mhm. Yeah,
Because I feel like I brushed up against that a lot in Glastonbury, where it's like, okay, I can kind of, I'm feeling the chakras now. I'm feeling the green. Okay, I'm feeling,
yeah.
okay, I feel connected to the Cancer star sign. The Venus rising, whoa, what's happening over here? And then people were like talking about human mapping, and they're like, look at this chart of my soul. And it's like all these random numbers. I'm like, what the fuck is that?
I mean, Yeah, I definitely think it can go too far. Glastonbury is a perfect example of that because, it falls into then it goes there is magic and this is also real and it
Mm,
can be used to enhance and heighten a life. But then there's the other side where the ego loves to run with it,
yeah,
wear it as a tiara, and go, well, I'm not actually going to do any work because I'm going to blame it on the planets.
yeah, yeah,
It's not that I'm being a dickhead, it's the planets.
yeah.
So for me, I think that's where it does become a little bit dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when it becomes to the point it becomes self-absorbed,
Yeah, yeah,
and I think
exactly.
said this when I was in Glastonbury, is like I felt some of it was masturbatory. Like it was all about just
Yeah,
inflating the ego or the self-pleasure more so than it was about the self-growth.
yeah. It's a bit of a both. There's a dance of both here, probably in equal measure.
Yeah.
But it can easily flip into one and back out as well. It's almost something you constantly have to check yourself with in Glastonbury.
Yeah.
Am I running into escapism or am I actually doing shadow work with spirit?
Yeah.
There's a fine line. Yeah.
But I think we see that in the mythological stories as well. In Norse mythology, the stories of Odin is Odin's considered the most wise wizard and all this stuff, and knows all the runes and sacrifice and all this stuff. And I see those
Mm.
parables in the spiritual journey, the hero's journey of doing plant
Yeah.
medicines, of going to the darkness, of seeing the other side. But there is the dark side of that. And Odin, and later in his life, was not known as a good person or a good god. He was elusive. He spent a huge amount of times away from his responsibilities, his family, and his livelihood. Super paranoid, and eventually his own paranoia is what led to his downfall. And so it's like there is kind of this warning
Mhm.
sign in Odin as well, is that you need to watch out for these things because I think the key is moderation. Is if you do too much of this magic stuff, if you go too deep into it, you're going to end off
Mhm.
worse off in the end than you're going to find in the initial stages.
Absolutely. And there's something about being ready for that shamanic kind of shadow work as well. In fact, interestingly, the Arthurian legends also have a lot of that and is it Theon as well from the Irish sagas, where, somebody will go down into the underworld to receive something or fight something or, achieve something. And they'll get disembodied, they'll have their limbs thrown apart and put back together again, literally.
Yeah,
And they'll lose all their men on the journey and then they'll resurface with the gold for the village. And what that tells us about that hero's journey is it's not actually a joke. It's not something you can do over a weekend. Your ego will be dismantled. You will have an emotional meltdown and, you'll break down in order to break through
yeah,
if you want to work with spirit. And you see this being brought up with people in Glastonbury. It's known to bring all this stuff up in people to look at. It's quite rare for someone to move to
yeah,
Glastonbury and not have a complete emotional meltdown within the first year.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
that's
it's fascinating, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing with like the dark side of magic and stuff like that is well, no, my thought connection was like Protestantism, the death of ritual. Is rituals give us various different techniques to help deal with these meltdowns, help deal with this darkness. Whereas, like
Yeah.
again, the removal of ritual and just having prayer is good, but it can only do so much. And so, when it comes to the heavier
Yeah,
stuff, you need ritual. You need that lineage of the druids,
yeah,
of the shamans, and the medicine people, because they know how to deal with the deeper shit that just prayer is not going to
yeah.
solve.
Well, the difference, isn't it? It's just so interesting. Prayer in Christianity is going out of oneself. It's going up and asking away from the self for healing.
Mm,
Whereas ritual and the Druidic pagan traditions are about dealing with what's around you. You're on the earth.
yeah.
How can you heal with and ritual is about embodying it, actually seeking the answers within yourself. And it's not that escapism. It's not that you're trying to get to heaven. You're actually trying to face your own reality on
Yeah.
earth. Very different energies.
So I think probably this will need to be the last question because we're past an hour, I believe. Is
Oh God.
naturally. No, this is good. I'm,
Always.
I'm glad this is the topic. This was a good conversation,
Yeah.
and I hope everyone else is enjoying as well. And let us know down below in the comments what you think magic is. But my final question to you, Kubi, is what is the connection between magic and the sacred?
Magic and the sacred. For me, they're very, very entwined actually, because I suppose it's about where you find meaning in life. If you find meaning in life, you find the sacred. And when you find the sacred, you are in that realm of magic.
Mm.
you know, you can interact with it. Then you are part of it. You've woven yourself into the tapestry of life. Then.
Yeah. So, like for instance, like in the making of your wands or your staves,
Mm.
what transforms that ordinary piece of wood into something that is sacred and magical?
It's the meaning.
Hmm.
It's the meaning. So actually, I would argue it's not even a sacred object until
Mm.
somebody takes it as one.
Yeah.
And then because it has meaning and relevance to them and it's symbolic of something, maybe it marks an initiation or a point in their life, that's when the magic begins.
Yeah.
I get asked that a lot. People are like, oh, you know, how come, what is it that's magic about the wands? And I'm like, well, how magic are you? Because if you're going to own one, that's when it becomes magic.
Right.
It's just an object. It's just a stick, until it's a decorative stick until somebody owns it, and it's the
Yeah.
human that embodies it imbues it with the magic.
Yeah, and the reason I bring this up is because something that's changed within my own
Mm.
personal journey is this is kind of a long story, but I think it's an important one. In January, I was gifted like what I have a tattoo of a turkey because one of my spirit guides is a turkey, and I was gifted a gigantic turkey like tail, like the entire butt of a turkey, so
Oh.
the full like fan. And I was gifted this in January by a member in the community. And at the time, I like was like, "Oh, thank you so much," and I threw it in my trunk of my car and never touched it. And it's just like, this is a beautiful gift, and it's like, I was like, "Oh, I get gifts all the time," and thank you so much.
Oh no.
Yeah, because I just didn't feel connected to it. And then in the sweat lodge I did, I was told this like super emotional story from the man who ran the sweat lodge, and he was talking about how he had like this beautiful big black like feather of like a big bird. I forget which one it was, but
Mm.
it's like this big, it's super thick, and he used it for all his ceremonies. He used it to like waft the smoke, and he used it to like cleanse people. And he was like
Yeah.
talking about this like journey he went through to get it, and how much he cried and prayed over this one feather. I was like, dude, I was gifted an entire turkey tail, just like just gifted, and I was like, oh cool, and threw it in the trunk of my car. And I was like, holy shit, like this thing should have
Mhm.
much more meaning to me. And so I came
Mhm.
and I came to this event we had for midsummer, and it was like the key element of my ritual. And so it moved
Yeah.
from just being this piece of junk I threw in my car that meant nothing to me, and it should, to I adopted it as something sacred, and I used it in
Yeah.
ceremony, and then it became a sacred object. And so you made that transition because I myself had to make the transition in order to be worthy of using it as a sacred object.
Yeah.
So nothing
That
about the
makes
turkey,
perfect sense.
nothing about the feathers changed. I changed.
Exactly. You had to almost be ready to make meaning for it, to create meaning for it.
Yeah, and then
Yeah,
the
and then
more I
it's
use it, the more again intuition. I didn't read a book on how to use this fan. It just kind of
yeah.
came to me. It's like we had a sacred fire in the weekend, and I used it to fan the fire. And so it was used, and we were every time we put wood on the fire. It was one of the things I worked with everyone on. It was like the sacred fire. Every time we put wood on it, we put cedar, mugwort, and tobacco on the fire as an offering to the fire spirits.
Yeah.
And then I would use the turkey fan, and then at the final ceremony, I was like, oh, I can use this to like fan people. And so I would use it to fan the smoke onto people from the sacred fire. And then
Mm.
at the Serpent Mounds, I was doing some reflecting and intuition on remembering like one of the things people would do to cleanse is they would take feathers or like plants and then rub them on people at various medicine ceremonies and things like that. I'm like, I have this sacred fan. And so I had people come
Yeah.
up, and I would use the fan to like rub on them and then blow it into the distance. And so I would go to the east directions, I would wipe someone down, and then I would fan the negative energy away. It's
Mm.
like, why am I doing this? I didn't read a book, but that's what intuition
Yeah.
told me to do with my sacred object. And it's like, this is all,
Oh.
it's all magic, it's all weird. If you wrote that down and explained it to a normie, they're like, what the hell are you doing? But I'm like, it makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense. And oh, I'm really glad that you got to bond with it eventually. That's
Oh, I
so
love that thing
sweet.
now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a good place to end this episode.
With a turkey butt.
The turkey butt. Yeah, now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so protective of it. Like, how am I going to travel with this thing? Like, it is still in my car because I feel like I don't have any proper way to store it. Like, I'm going to have to buy like a specific case if I want to travel with it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. You have to get a homemade DIY turkey butt case.
I'm just going to send pictures of a bunch of Etsy people and be
Custom
like,
made.
how do I protect this? I'm going to need like a French horn case or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, in the closing of this episode, what's coming on in your going on in your life? Anything you need to promote? Anything happening with you? Could be.
So I'm taking a little bit of time off this summer. I'm not doing too much, But there is the ongoing Druid OM journey, which is exploring the 20 wisdom of the trees each month. And we do that as an online group and learn about like the tinctures, the magic, the spells, the rituals, and the deities that you can connect with as you work with each tree. So it's a really beautiful life path and spiritual journey. And yeah, we're doing the next one. Well, it's the first Sunday of every month, so essentially you can join whenever you like within that cycle. Yeah.
So mine's going to take a while now. I got a lot going, which is great. Like, I'm glad I come back to the States. I got a lot going on now,
Yeah.
which is really cool. As far as like retreats, I still have the one in Wales that's coming up. It still has spaces open. So I'll be coming back in October to the UK to go to Wales to help with a spiritual retreat there. And then hopefully Kubi and I will be planning one, which we still need to get that sorted out, what we're going to do. So we need to actually give some brain power to that because we need to plan what we want to do.
Yeah.
And then as far as individual retreats, I still plan on doing my Spirits of Appalachia event in September. I need to find a new date for that. But I'm also involved in a couple other small little projects now. So I was recently contacted by a movie that needed a consultant for someone. They were doing a thriller-based horror movie kind of on vulva Sather magic. And they reached out to me and they were like, hey, can you help us? And they sent me the script and I've read through the script and I'm consulting on that now. So
Oh wow.
yeah, and I'm actually promoting it too. So it's called Lineage. So I'll start linking that down below. I actually have an interview, like a meeting with like the director and the writer today to help them rewrite the script to make it more authentic. And that's the thing
Oh,
that got me on. So, they reached out just saying, hey, we just want to have someone consult on this who actually is a spiritual practitioner to make sure that this is like legitimate. And I read the script and I was like, yeah, this isn't exactly how Sather magic actually is.
amazing.
And like basically their idea of Sather magic was some ringing. They were like, there's gonna be some ringing and then things are gonna move around. I'm like, this sounds like a shitty Exorcist movie. So I
Yeah.
was like, if you actually want to hear my opinion, this is not what it's like at all. So like,
That's good.
and I was like, do you want me to like help you? And they're like, yep. And they got everything set up with the writer and the director and everything so that they can make it more
Yeah.
authentic. So I really appreciate that. It's still going to be like relatively low budget, but not like cheap. So chances are I'm going to be doing a lot of work with them. Excited to talk more about that, but it's still an up and coming project. So I'm going to be helping support that. And hopefully working on it too when it actually gets filming. And
Wow, that's
yeah,
great. Good job they
and
got you involved.
yeah, no, it's really cool. And I was also reached out by the people I buy my Hape from, for Visions. So I actually am going to be an ambassador with them. And this is the first time I've ever accepted an ambassadorship because I think those programs are bullshit half the time. But this is one I actually believe in. It's something I
Yeah.
already use. It's something I purchase for myself very often, and it's something I know more people are getting into. And they actually do care about like making sure the money goes back to the indigenous people of South America as much as possible. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons I've always supported them as a brand. And so I'm working on with them. I might be doing a project that takes me to South America on that too. So
Wow,
yeah, there's a lot of cool,
exciting.
yeah, a lot of cool things in the works. So obviously, if you want a discount,
Yeah.
the whole ambassador mumbo jumbo. But hey, it's a discount. It helps me out a little bit. It helps them out. And so I'll leave that link down below too. So lots going on, and it's really cool. So hopefully some new cool projects, all in the midst of all the Irish content coming out as well. So everything's going well over here at the old YouTube factory.
Amazing. Busy times up ahead.
Yeah, the summer times, it's busy. It's like I've just been like, summer is about
Yeah.
work, and I think that's maybe the thing I'll leave people with today. Again, reflecting on what summer means. And summer, there's long days. You have extra energy because of the sun. So make sure you get plenty of physical exercise. Get out, absorb that sun, and get to work. Because
Get
and
to work.
get to work. Like
Get to work.
if you have passions, if you have projects, if you want to write that book, you want to make that YouTube video, you want to make that painting, whatever your passion is, this is the time of year to do it. And when I say get to work, I'm not saying get to work at the factory, get to work at your job. Get to work on your passions. This is the time of year to do it.
Yeah, so true. Or you can sleep in a hayfield and just
Get to
enjoy the
work.
summer days.
You can sleep in the fall. Fall and winter is the time to sleep. Do it then. Now get to work.
It's so true. There we go.
And Kubi's over here like, well, I'm taking a break right now.
I'm gonna go sleep in a hayfield. I'll see you guys later.
All right, with that, let's all go get to work or sleep in a hayfield. But until next time, thank you so much for joining Kubi and myself, and we'll see you in the next video here at the Tree of Life podcast.